William had always been different from other princes. While his younger brother Harry preferred adventure and excitement, William found joy in quiet moments and genuine connections with people. At 38 years old, he had learned that true royalty meant serving others, not being served. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Kensington Palace. William woke up early, as he always did, and looked out of his window at the gardens below. The autumn leaves were falling gently, creating a golden carpet on the ground. He smiled, thinking about how his children would love to jump in those leaves later. After breakfast with Catherine and the children, William prepared for what he thought would be a routine visit to a local community center in East London. Secretary James had briefed him about the center's work with elderly residents who lived alone. Many of these people rarely had visitors and spent their days in silence, watching life pass by through their windows, the drive-through London's busy streets gave William time to think. He remembered his mother, Princess Diana, and how she had taught him that being royal meant using their position to bring light into dark places. She had shown him that a simple gesture, a warm smile, or just listening to someone could change their entire day. When the royal car pulled up to the modest brick building, William noticed how different this place looked from the grand venues he usually visited. There were no red carpets, no formal decorations, just a simple sign that read Sunshine Community Center. A small group of staff members waited nervously by the entrance, smoothing their clothes and checking their watches. Mrs. Thompson, the center's director, greeted William with a warm but slightly shaky handshake. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Your Highness, we're so honored to have you here today," she said, her voice filled with genuine excitement. William smiled warmly. "Please just call me William. I'm the one who's honored to be here." As they walked through the center's main hall, Mrs. Thompson explained how they served over 200 elderly residents from the surrounding neighborhoods. "Many of them haven't seen their families in months," she said sadly. "Some don't have any family left at all. We try to be their family here." The first stop was the activities room, where about 20 elderly people sat around tables, some playing cards, others working on puzzles. Their faces lit up when they saw William enter. He spent time at each table asking about their games, listening to their stories, and laughing at their jokes. At one table, an elderly man named George showed William his collection of old photographs. "This is me during the war," George said proudly, pointing to a black and white photo of a young soldier. "I was stationed in France." William listened intently as George shared memories of his service, his late wife, and his children who lived far away. An elderly woman named Rose grabbed William's hand with surprising strength. "You have your mother's eyes," she said softly. "She was an angel, that one. Always thinking of others." William felt a familiar warmth in his chest whenever someone mentioned his mother. Even after all these years, her memory continued to touch people's hearts. After spending an hour in the activities room, Mrs. Thompson led William toward the residential wing. "We have 12 private rooms for our most isolated residents," she explained. "These are people who rarely leave their rooms, some because of health issues, others because they've simply lost hope." As they walked down the quiet hallway, William noticed how clean and cheerful everything looked despite the building's age. Fresh flowers sat in vases along the corridor, and children's artwork decorated the walls. "Local schools bring their students here sometimes," Mrs. Thompson explained. "The children love spending time with our residents, and our residents absolutely come alive when the little ones visit." They stopped at several rooms along the way. In each one, William met remarkable people with incredible stories. There was Mrs. Patterson, a former teacher who had taught for 40 years and still remembered the names of hundreds of her students. There was Mr. Ahmed, who had come to England 50 years ago and built a successful business before retiring alone after his wife passed away. Each conversation was meaningful. But William sensed that Mrs. Thompson was leading him somewhere specific. She kept glancing toward the end of the hallway with a mixture of hope and concern in her eyes. "There's someone special I'd like you to meet," she finally said as they approached the last door. "Her name is Eleanor, but everyone calls her Ellie. She's 93 years old and has been with us for 3 years now." Mrs. Thompson paused before continuing, her voice becoming softer. "Ellie rarely speaks to anyone anymore. She used to be so vibrant, always telling stories and making everyone laugh. But something changed about 6 months ago. She stopped coming. 2 activities, stopped eating in the dining room, and now she spends most of her time just sitting by her window." William felt his heart tighten. He had met many people struggling with loneliness and depression during his work with mental health charities. "What happened 6 months ago?" he asked gently. "We're not entirely sure," Mrs. Thompson replied. "Around that time, she received a letter that seemed to upset her greatly. She wouldn't tell us what it said, but she's been different ever since. She only leaves her room for medical appointments, and even then she barely speaks." They stood outside Ellie's door, and William could hear the faint sound of classical music playing inside. Mrs. Thompson knocked gently. "Ellie, dear, I have someone I'd like you to meet." There was no response from inside the room. Mrs. Thompson looked at William apologetically. She doesn't usually answer when people knock. "But maybe," she trailed off, looking hopeful. William stepped closer to the door. Something about this situation felt different, more important than just another royal visit. He had learned to trust these feelings over the years. His mother had taught him that sometimes the most meaningful moments came when you least expected. "Then may I?" William asked, gesturing toward the door handle. Mrs. Thompson nodded, though she looked uncertain. "Of course, Your Highness. Please don't be disappointed if she doesn't respond. We've all tried so many times." William took a deep breath and slowly turned the handle. As the door began to open, he had no idea that what he was about to discover would not only change Ellie's life forever, but would also remind him why his royal duties were so much more than just ceremonial appearances. The door opened slowly, revealing a small but beautifully kept room filled with afternoon sunlight. Near the window sat a tiny elderly woman in a floral dress, her silver hair neatly arranged despite her isolation. Eleanor looked up from her hands, which had been folded in her lap, and her pale blue eyes met William's with a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Hello," William said softly, stepping into the room with Mrs. Thompson close behind. "I'm William. I hope you don't mind me visiting." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, her eyes studying his face carefully. Then something remarkable happened. Her expression changed from confusion to recognition, and then to something that looked almost like disbelief. "William?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Prince William?" "Yes," he replied gently, moving closer, but being careful not to overwhelm her. "May I sit with you for a while?" Eleanor nodded slowly, gesturing to a small chair near her bed. As William sat down, he noticed the room's details. Despite its simplicity, everything was arranged with care. Fresh flowers sat on the windowsill, and the walls were covered with old photographs, postcards, and what appeared to be newspaper clippings. Mrs. Thompson remained by the door, watching in amazement. This was more words than Eleanor had spoken to anyone in months. "I know who you are," Eleanor said, her voice growing slightly stronger. "You look just like your grandmother did when she was young, Queen Elizabeth, God rest her soul. I used to see her, you know." William leaned forward with interest. "You knew my grandmother?" A small smile appeared on Eleanor's weathered face, the first smile Mrs. Thompson had seen from her in half a year. "Not personally, dear, but I worked at Buckingham Palace for 3 years. I was part of the housekeeping staff." William's eyes widened with genuine surprise. "You worked at the palace? That's incredible. When were you there?" "From 1955 to 1990, Eleanor replied, her voice becoming more animated as memories began to flow. "I started when I was just 18 years old. Your grandmother was so young then, still getting used to being queen. And your grandfather, well, Prince Philip, was quite the character." Mrs. Thompson quietly backed out of the room, sensing that something special was happening. She had never seen Eleanor engage with anyone like this. Eleanor continued, her eyes brightening as she spoke. "I remember when your father was born. The whole palace was buzzing with excitement. And then when you and Harry came along, oh my, what joy you brought to everyone." William found himself captivated by Eleanor's stories. "What was it like working there? What do you remember most?" Eleanor's smile grew wider. "The Christmas mornings were magical. Your grandmother always made sure the staff felt included. would personally thank each of us and give us small gifts. She remembered everyone's names, even mine, and I was just a cleaning lady. You weren't just anything, William said firmly. You were part of what made the palace a home, not just a building. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears at his words. Your mother used to say things like that too, Princess Diana. She was an angel, that one. Always stopping to chat with the staff, asking about our families, remembering our birthdays. William felt that familiar warmth when someone mentioned his mother. Tell me about her. What do you remember? She was so young when she married your father, Eleanor said, her voice soft with memory. Sometimes she would come to the staff quarters, just to talk. She said we felt more like real people than the politicians and dignitaries she usually had to entertain. Eleanor stood up slowly and walked to her wall of photographs. William followed and was amazed to see decades of royal family. Photos? Many of them candid shots that looked like they had been taken by someone who was actually there. I kept these all these years, Eleanor explained, pointing to various pictures. This one is from Christmas 1982. Look how young your parents were. This one is from your first birthday party. You were such a happy baby, always giggling. William stared at a photo he had never seen before. It showed him as a toddler, sitting on his mother's lap, while she laughed at something off camera. His father stood nearby, smiling widely. They looked like any normal, happy family. Where did you get this photo? William asked, his voice thick. With emotion, your mother gave it to me, Eleanor replied. She said she wanted the staff to have pictures too, because we were part of the family's story. She gave photos to all of us who had been there for special moments. William touched the glass covering the photo gently. He had official portraits from that time, but this candid shot captured something different. It showed genuine happiness and love, unposed and natural. She was right, William said quietly. You were part of our story. You still are. Eleanor wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. I've missed you all so much. After I retired, I felt so disconnected from the life I had known for 35 years. The palace wasn't just my job, it was my whole world. William began to understand why Eleanor had become so withdrawn. Is that why you've been so sad recently? Missing the palace? Lenore hesitated, then walked to her small dresser and pulled out an envelope. I received this letter 6 months ago, she said, her voice shaking slightly. It's from the Palace Archives Department. William took the letter and read it carefully. It was a formal notice explaining that the palace was digitizing old staff records and asking former employees to return any palace property they might still have, including photographs. They want me to return all my pictures, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. These photos are all I have left of that life, of those beautiful memories. But they belong to the royal family, and I understand that. I just... I don't know how to say goodbye to them. William looked at the letter, then at the wall of precious memories, and finally at Eleanor's heartbroken face. He began to understand. The depth of her sadness. These weren't just photographs to her. They were connections to a life of service and love that had defined her for decades. Eleanor, William said gently, may I ask you something? She nodded, wiping her eyes again. In all your years at the palace, did anyone ever tell you how much your work meant to the family? Eleanor thought for a moment. Your grandmother thanked us, of course. And your mother was always kind. But we were staff, dear. We knew our place. William shook his head. Your place was as part of something bigger than any of us could be alone. You helped create the environment where my brother and I could grow up feeling loved and safe. You were there for some of the most important moments of our lives. Eleanor looked at him with surprise. I never thought of it that way. Well, you should, William said firmly. And about these photos? ... double quotes. He paused, looking around the room again. I think there might be a solution we haven't considered yet. Eleanor looked at him hopefully, but also with concern. She didn't want to get in trouble with the palace, but she also couldn't bear the thought of losing these precious memories. William stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the London skyline in the distance, he could see the city where he had grown up, where Eleanor had spent 35 years of her life serving his family. An idea was forming in his mind, but he needed to be careful about how he approached it. Eleanor, he said, turning back to her. "Would you trust me to help you with this situation?" "Of course, dear," she replied without hesitation. "But I don't want to cause any trouble." William smiled. "You're not going to cause trouble. In fact, I think you might help solve a problem I didn't even know we had." William sat back down next to Eleanor, his mind working quickly. As he looked at her collection of photographs, he realized that these weren't just personal mementos, they were historical documents that captured moments of royal life from a unique perspective. "Eleanor, these photographs are extraordinary," William said, studying the images more closely. "They show our family in ways that official portraits never could." He pointed to a photo that showed his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, laughing with several staff members during what appeared to be a Christmas celebration. Everyone in the picture looked relaxed and genuinely happy. "The palace archives would be incomplete without images like this," William continued. "These photos tell the story of the people who made the royal family's life possible. They're not just pictures, they're history." Eleanor looked confused. "But the letter says I have to return them." "The letter is from an administrator who doesn't understand what they're asking for," William explained gently. "They think they're just collecting old staff photos, but what you have here is much more valuable than that." William pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of Eleanor's photo collection. "May I document these?" I want to show you something." Eleanor nodded, watching as William carefully photographed each image, making sure to capture not just the photos themselves, but also Eleanor's handwritten notes beneath each one. "You wrote captions for all of these," William observed. "Oh yes," Eleanor said, brightening up. "I wanted to remember the details. Like this one, it's from Prince Charles's engagement party. Your mother was so nervous that day, but she needn't have been. Everyone loved her immediately." William read Eleanor's neat handwriting beneath the photo. "July 1981, Lady Diana's first staff greeting. She insisted on shaking hands with every single person, even though protocol didn't require it. She said if I'm going to live here, I should know everyone who makes it home." "Eleanor, do you realize what you've created here?" William asked, his excitement growing. "You've documented 35 years of royal history from the perspective of someone who was actually there, living it every day. These aren't just photos, they're a memoir." Eleanor looked at her wall with new eyes. "I suppose I never thought of it that way. I just wanted to remember the good times." William stood up and began pacing the small room, his mind racing with possibilities. "What if I told you that instead of returning these photos to be stored in some archive where no one will ever see them, we could do something that would honor both your service and preserve these memories forever?" "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. "I mean creating something that celebrates the people who dedicated their lives to serving the royal family. An exhibition, or maybe even a book, that shows what palace life was really like through the eyes of the staff who lived it." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You mean put my pictures in a book? Not just your pictures?" William explained, his enthusiasm building. "I imagine there are other former staff members who have similar collections, similar memories. We could bring all of these stories together to create something truly special." William sat down again and took Eleanor's hands in his. "Eleanor, you said you felt disconnected from the palace after you retired. But what if you could help create something that would connect other people to that world? What if your memories could help others understand what royal service really means?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing what William was suggesting. "You really think people would want to see my old pictures?" "I think people would be fascinated to see the royal family through your eyes," William replied. "Official photographs show us in our formal roles, but your pictures show us as people. They show the laughter, the quiet moments, the genuine relationships." Eleanor walked back to her photo wall and pointed to one picture in particular. "This one is my favorite," she said softly. William looked and saw a photo of himself as a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the palace steps with what appeared to be a small group of staff children during a summer garden party. "Your mother organized that party," Eleanor explained. "She thought it would be nice for the staff's children to play together while their parents worked. You were so kind to the younger children, making sure everyone was included in the games." William stared at the photo, a memory suddenly surfacing. There was a little girl who was too shy to join in, and Mother encouraged me to invite her personally. That's right, Eleanor smiled. That little girl was my granddaughter, Sarah. She was visiting me at work that day. You walked right up to her and said, "Would you like to be on my team?" She talked about it for years afterward. William felt a chill run down his spine. Your granddaughter, where is she now? Eleanor's smile faded slightly. She lives in Australia with her family. I don't see her very often anymore. She's a teacher now, has 3 children of her own. Does she know about your time at the palace? Oh yes, she loves hearing the stories. But she thinks I'm just a silly old woman with too many memories. William shook his head firmly. You're not silly, and these aren't just memories. They're treasures. I think it's time more people understood that. He pulled out his phone again and began making notes. Eleanor, would you be willing to work with me on this project? I'm thinking we could create a proper exhibition that celebrates the service and dedication of palace staff throughout the years. Eleanor looked uncertain. I don't know anything about exhibitions. You don't need to know about exhibitions, William assured her. You know about life, about service, about loyalty, and about love. That's what this would be about. William paused, looking around the room one more time. There's something else I want to discuss with you, but I need to make a phone call first. Would that be all right? Eleanor nodded, watching as William stepped toward the window and dialed the number. James, William said into his phone, I need you to contact the Palace Archives Department immediately. There's been a misunderstanding about some staff photographs that need to be resolved. No, don't collect them. Right. Instead, I want you to set up a meeting with the head archivist. Need to discuss a new project. Eleanor listened, her heart beating faster as she began to understand that this wasn't just a kind gesture from a prince trying to make an old woman feel better. This was something real, something that could actually happen. William ended his call and turned back to Eleanor. The letter you received will be rescinded by tomorrow. Your photographs are not going anywhere unless you decide you want them to be part of something bigger. You can do that? Eleanor asked in amazement. William smiled. One of the few advantages of being a prince, sometimes you can cut through bureaucracy to make things right. Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past hour. I can't believe this is real. Good, it's real, William assured her. But Eleanor, I have one more question for you, and this one is very important. She looked up at him expectantly. Besides your granddaughter in Australia, do you have any other family? Anyone who should know about what we're planning? Eleanor's expression changed, becoming sad again. Oh dear. My husband passed away 15 years ago, and Sarah is my only grandchild. I have a few friends here at the center, but most of my old friends from the palace have passed on. William nodded thoughtfully. What about Sarah? Oh, when was the last time you spoke with her? Oh, we email sometimes, Eleanor said. But with the time difference and her busy life with the children, it's not very often. William looked at Eleanor carefully, an idea forming. Eleanor, what would you say if I told you that this project might bring some unexpected changes to your life? What kind of changes? She asked, though she looked more curious than worried. William smiled mysteriously. The kind that remind you that your story isn't over yet. In fact, I think the best chapters might still be waiting to be written. Over the next few days, William couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor and her incredible collection of memories. He had his staff research other former palace employees, discovered there were dozens of people like Eleanor, dedicated individuals, who had served the royal family for decades and then quietly disappeared into retirement with only their memories and a few precious photographs. On Friday morning, William returned to the community center unannounced. Mrs. Thompson was surprised, but delighted to see him back so soon. "How is Eleanor doing?" William asked, as they walked toward her room. "It's remarkable," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice filled with wonder. "She's been talking to everyone about your visit. She even joined us for dinner in the main dining room yesterday, the first time in months. Whatever you did, it brought her back to life." When they reached Eleanor's room, they found the door open and Eleanor sitting at a small table with several photo albums spread out in front of her. She was writing in a notebook, carefully documenting memories associated with each picture. "William," she exclaimed when she saw him, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "I've been working on something I think you'll want to see." She gestured to the notebook she had filled with stories. "I started writing down everything I could remember about each photograph. The dates, the occasions, the people involved, and what was happening behind the scenes that day." William sat down and began reading Eleanor's neat handwriting. Her stories were fascinating. They revealed moments of humanity, humor, and genuine emotion that had never been recorded in any official history. "Eleanor, this is incredible," William said after reading several pages.
Yes.
"You're creating a historical record that doesn't exist anywhere else." "I wanted to make sure I got the details right," Eleanor explained. "Some of these memories are so precious to me, and I realize that when I'm gone, they'll disappear forever unless I write them down." William looked up from the notebook. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here today. I have some news about our project, and I think you're going to be very excited." Eleanor set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "I spoke with the Royal Archives Department, and they're completely supportive of creating an exhibition about palace staff experiences. In fact, they're so enthusiastic that they want to make it a major presentation at the palace itself." Eleanor's eyes widened. "At the palace? I mean, people would visit the palace to see my pictures, not just your pictures?" William clarified. "We've located 12 other former staff members who have similar collections. Together, you've documented nearly 60 years of royal family life from perspectives no one has ever seen before." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "12 others? Do I know any of them?" William smiled. "Actually, yes. Do you remember a woman named Margaret Torres who worked in the palace kitchen?" "Maggie," Eleanor exclaimed. "Of course I remember Maggie. She made the most wonderful scones. Is she still alive?" "It's very much alive, and living in Brighton. And when we contacted her about the exhibition, she mentioned you specifically."
Yeah.
"She said you two used to have tea together during breaks." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't seen Maggie in over 10 years. We lost touch after I moved here." "Well, you're going to see her next week," William announced. "We're organizing a reunion of all the former staff members who want to participate in the exhibition. It will be held at the palace, in the staff quarters, where you all used to work." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "You mean I can go back? To the palace?" "Not just go back," William said gently. "You're going to be guests of honor. We want you and the others to guide us through the process of creating this exhibition. After all, these are your stories to tell." Eleanor stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the London skyline. William could see her shoulders shaking slightly, and he realized she was crying. "Eleanor, are you all right?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. She turned to him with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Would see the palace again? I never thought anyone would care about an old cleaning lady's memories." "You were never just a cleaning lady," William reminded her firmly. "You were part of our family's story, and now you're going to help tell that story to the world." Eleanor wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Yesterday, after you left, I did something I hadn't done in months." "What was that?" "I called my granddaughter Sarah in Australia." Eleanor's voice became stronger as she continued. "I told her about your visit and about the exhibition. I told her about all the memories I've been keeping to myself."
Ow.
William waited, sensing there was more to the story. "She cried," Eleanor continued. "She said she had been so worried about me that I hadn't sounded like myself in our recent conversations. She said she could hear the sadness in my voice but didn't know how to help." Eleanor walked back to her table and picked up her phone. "She wants to come visit for the exhibition. She's booking a flight from Sydney as we speak. William felt his heart swell with emotion. Eleanor? That's wonderful news. There's more, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Sarah is bringing her children, my great-grandchildren. I haven't seen them in 3 years because the trip is so expensive. She said this is too important to miss. Then William realized that what had started as a simple royal visit was turning into something much more significant. When will they arrive? Next week, just in time for the reunion at the palace. Sarah said she wants to see where her grandmother worked for all those years. She wants her children to understand what their great-grandmother did. Eleanor paused. Looking directly at William, she also said something else. She said she's proud of me and that she never realized how important my work at the palace really was. William felt a lump forming in his throat. What did you tell her? I told her that it took a prince visiting an old woman in a community center to help me remember that myself. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on how dramatically things had changed in just a few days. William, Eleanor said finally, "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why did you really come here? I mean, I know you visit lots of places, but this feels different. This feels like it was meant to happen." William considered her question carefully. "Honestly, Eleanor, I'm not sure I have a complete answer. But I will say this. My mother always taught me that the most important moments in life often come when we're not expecting them. She said that if we pay attention, the universe has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be." Eleanor nodded. "Thoughtfully, your mother was a wise woman." She was. I think she would have loved what we're doing with this exhibition. She always believed that everyone's story mattered, especially the stories of people who worked behind the scenes to make other people's lives better. Eleanor looked at her wall of photographs again, but now, instead of sadness, her expression showed anticipation and excitement. "William," she said, "I have one more favor to ask. Anything. When we have the reunion next week and when Sarah and the children are there, would it be possible for them to meet you? I know it's a lot to ask, but it would mean everything to Sarah, to know that her grandmother's work was appreciated by the family we served." William smiled warmly. "Eleanor, it would be my honor to meet your family. In fact, I insist on it." As William prepared to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, when I had forgotten how to see myself." "Thank you for reminding me why this work matters," William replied. "And Eleanor, yes? Well, your story is far from over. I have a feeling the best is yet to come." The morning of the palace reunion arrived, with brilliant autumn sunshine streaming through the windows of Buckingham Palace's staff quarters. William had arrived early to personally oversee the preparations, wanting everything to be perfect for Eleanor and the other former staff members. The room they had chosen for the gathering was the same break room where many of these people had shared countless cups of tea and conversations during their years of service. William had requested that it be set up exactly as it would have been during their working years. Simple wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and fresh flowers in small vases. Mrs. Thompson had driven Eleanor to the palace, and as their car passed through the gates, Eleanor pressed her face to the window like a child seeing something magical for the first time. "I can't believe I'm really here," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. When they entered the familiar corridors, Eleanor's steps slowed as memories flooded back. She touched the walls gently, as if greeting old friends. "The wallpaper is different," she murmured, "but the feeling is the same." William was waiting in the break room when Eleanor entered, and he was struck immediately by the transformation in her appearance. Gone was the sad, isolated woman he had met just 2 weeks ago. In her place stood someone who carried herself with dignity and purpose, wearing a beautiful blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "Eleanor, you look absolutely radiant," William said, taking her hands in greeting. "I feel like myself again," she replied, her smile bright and genuine. As other former staff members began arriving, the room filled with joyful reunions. Eleanor spotted Margaret Torres immediately, and the two women embraced with tears of happiness. "Ellie, you look wonderful," Margaret exclaimed. "I can't believe we're really here together again." William watched as these remarkable people reconnected, sharing stories and memories, laughing together as if no time had passed at all. There was Thomas, who had been a palace gardener for 40 years. There was Mrs. Chen, who had worked in the royal laundry and still remembered the specific way Princess Diana liked her clothes pressed. There was Robert, who had been a footman, and could tell stories about state dinners that would fascinate historians. But William's attention kept returning to Eleanor, who seemed to glow with happiness as she moved from person to person, renewing old friendships and sharing her excitement about the exhibition project. "Your Highness," Margaret said, approaching William with Eleanor beside her. "Ellie has told me about your plans for the exhibition. I brought something I think you might want to see." Margaret opened a small suitcase and pulled out a leather-bound book. "I kept a diary during my 30 years in the palace kitchen," she explained. "I wrote down menus for special occasions, funny things that happened during meal preparations, and observations about the family's favorite foods." William opened the diary and immediately became absorbed in Margaret's detailed entries. One page described preparing a birthday cake for his 5th birthday, complete with his specific request for extra chocolate and no scary decor. 3 weeks later, on a crisp November evening, Buckingham Palace glowed with warm light as guests arrived for the private preview of Behind the Scenes, 60 Years of Royal Service. William stood in the main exhibition hall watching as families of former staff members entered with expressions of wonder and pride. Eleanor arrived wearing an elegant navy dress that Sarah had brought from Australia, and she was accompanied not only by her immediate family, but also by several residents and staff from the Sunshine Community Center. Mrs. Thompson walked beside her, beaming with pride at the transformation in Eleanor's confidence and joy. "Your Highness," Mrs. Thompson said as they approached William, "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. Eleanor has become a completely different person. She's organized activities for other residents, started a storytelling group, and even convinced 2 other former palace staff members living in care facilities to share their memories." William looked at Eleanor with admiration. "You've been busy?" Eleanor laughed, a sound that had become frequent and natural again. "Once I remembered that my stories mattered, I realized there were others who needed to remember that too. I've started what we call the memory circle at the center. People share stories from their working lives, and we help each other write them down." Sarah, standing nearby with her children, added, "She's become quite the local celebrity." The community center is talking about creating a permanent display of residents' memories. As they moved through the exhibition, Uyen watched Eleanor guide her great-grandchildren through the displays, explaining not just her own photographs but also those contributed by the other former staff members. Her transformation from an isolated, sad woman to someone who had reclaimed her sense of purpose and connection was remarkable. "Look at this one, Eleanor," said 8-year-old James, pointing to a photograph that showed a young Princess Diana helping to serve tea too. "Palace staff during a Christmas celebration. Your great-grandmother took this picture. Princess Diana insisted that the staff should be served by the family during the holidays, not the other way around." "She looks really nice," 6-year-old Emma observed. "She was more than nice," Eleanor replied. "She was kind in a way that made everyone around her feel important." William overheard this conversation and felt the familiar warmth that came whenever someone shared memories of his mother. He approached the family group. "Eleanor's right about that," he said to the children. "My mother believed that kindness was the most important quality a person could have." Emma looked up at William with the directness that only children possess. "Are you kind like your mummy was?" William knelt down to Emma's level. "I try to be. That's why I wanted to make sure everyone knew about your great-grandmother's important work." "Will you tell me about my great-grandmother when she was young?" Emma asked. Eleanor started to redirect the child's attention, but William held up his hand gently. "I'd be happy to," he said to Emma. "Your great-grandmother was one of the hardest-working people at the palace. She made sure everything was clean and beautiful for all the important visitors who came to see my family." He gestured toward one of Eleanor's photographs that showed her polishing silver in the palace's main dining room. "But more than that, she was always kind to everyone, even when she was very busy. She would stop her work to help other staff members, and she always had a smile for my brother and me when we were children." Emma nodded solemnly. absorbing this information about her great-grandmother's importance. As the evening progressed, William noticed that the former staff members had naturally gathered together, sharing stories and connecting their grandchildren and great-grandchildren with each other. Margaret Torres was showing Emma and her siblings how to properly fold napkins for a formal dinner, while Thomas the gardener was explaining to James how he had created topiary animals that had delighted William and Harry when they were boys. "This is extraordinary," said Dr. Amanda Richardson, the palace's head archivist, approaching William. "The response to this exhibition has exceeded all our expectations. We've had inquiries from historians, documentarians, and even international museums about the collection." William nodded, pleased but not surprised. These people preserved history without even realizing it. Their love for their work and their loyalty to the family motivated them to document moments that would have been lost forever otherwise. Dr. Richardson gestured toward Eleanor, who is now surrounded by several visitors asking questions about her photographs. "Mrs. Eleanor has been remarkable. She's volunteered to help us contact other former staff members who might have similar collections. She says she wants to make sure no one's story gets forgotten." As the formal presentations began, William took the stage to address the gathering. The room fell quiet as he looked out at the faces of people whose lives had been changed by this project. "When I walked into Eleanor's room at the Sunshine Community Center a month ago," William began, "I thought I was making a routine royal visit. I had no idea that I was about to meet someone who would remind me of the true meaning of service and dedication." He paused, his eyes finding Eleanor in the audience. She was sitting with her family, tears already beginning to form as she realized he was talking about her. "Eleanor, and all of you who served our family over the years, you didn't just clean rooms or prepare meals or tend gardens. You created the environment that allowed the royal family to function. You made it possible for us to fulfill our duties to the country because you took care of everything else." William's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But more than that, you showed us how to be better people. Through your example of loyalty, kindness, and quiet dignity, you taught us that true nobility comes not from titles or wealth, but from how we treat others and how we approach our responsibilities." The room was completely silent, except for the occasional sound of someone dabbing their eyes with a tissue. This exhibition tells your stories, but it also tells the story of what it really means to serve others. Eleanor, when you carefully preserved these photographs and wrote down these memories, you were creating a historical record that shows the human side of royal life. You documented love, laughter, dedication, and genuine relationships. William stepped away from the podium and walked toward Eleanor. "Would you please join me up here?" Eleanor looked surprised and started to shake her head, but Sarah gently encouraged her to stand. The audience applauded as Eleanor made her way to the front of the room, looking nervous but dignified. "Eleanor," William said, taking her hand, "I want to present you with something." He gestured to an aide who brought forward a small velvet box. "By order of His Majesty the King, you are being awarded the Royal Victorian Medal in recognition of your exceptional service to the Crown and your contribution to preserving royal history." Eleanor stared at the medal in shock. I don't understand. I was just doing my job." "You were doing much more than that," William replied firmly. "And now, thanks to this exhibition, thousands of people will understand the importance of what you and others like you accomplished." As William pinned the medal to Eleanor's dress, she began to cry. But these were tears of joy and recognition, not the tears of sadness and loneliness that had marked her recent years. "Thank you," she whispered to William. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen," he replied. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Eleanor looked out at the faces surrounding her, her family from Australia, her friends from the community center, her former colleagues from the palace, and dozens of other people who had been touched by her story. Later, as the evening was winding down, William found Eleanor sitting quietly in a corner with Emma on her lap, showing the little girl photographs on her phone. "What are you looking at?" William asked, joining them. "Pictures of my house in Australia," Emma replied. "Grandmama says she might come visit us there." William looked at Eleanor with surprise and delight. Are you thinking of traveling to Australia? Eleanor smiled, and for the first time in years, her smile showed anticipation for the future rather than just contentment with memories of the past. Sarah has been asking me to visit for years, but I always felt too sad to make such a big trip. Now, though I feel like I have stories to share and energy to make new memories. That sounds wonderful, William said. Eleanor shifted Emma to a more comfortable position and looked at William seriously. You know, when you first walked into my room, I thought my life was essentially over. I thought I was just waiting to die, surrounded by old photographs of better times. She paused, gesturing toward the exhibition around them. I realized that those weren't just old photographs. They were seeds waiting to grow into something new. William understood exactly what she meant. And now, Eleanor's eyes sparkled with the same vitality they had shown in her photographs from decades past. Now I know that every day is a chance to plant new seeds. Stories aren't over. They're just beginning new chapters.